The sound of breaking glass made Sylvia squeal, and they all turned to look towards the back of the office. The large red brick building was sturdy, the way the old builders used to build things, not the prefab most houses in the suburbs closer to the cities were made of. Jim had always thought that nothing short of a tank or a wrecking ball could break through the walls. The same went for all the old houses in Hallow Grove. The only glass at the back of the building was the big window in the storage room that overlooked the rear car park. Jim licked his dry lips and crawled forward to hunker next to Ben. Whatever those shadowy things were out there moving through the mist like specters, he'd make damn sure they didn't get in here. He and Ben had shotguns and 2 handguns each, and Mike held his shotgun in his lap with his loaded handgun and an entire box of shells beside him on the ground. He was doing his best to stay calm by taking deep breaths and letting them out slowly. Sally came to sit beside the 2 men, and Jim frowned when he saw how intense her stark blue eyes stared at the storage door beside the conference room. The hairs on his arm and the back of his neck stood up as though an electric current was flowing through him.
"Sally, you good?"
he asked. But she didn't respond and just kept staring at the door, reminding him of a guard dog on high alert after hearing something that might be a threat. He was just about to suggest that she go sit back with Mike and Sylvia when she suddenly dashed forwards towards the door.
"Sally,"
he called in a harsh whisper.
"What are you doing?"
Sally ignored him because she knew exactly what she was doing. She was angry and frustrated about what was happening, but right now she had to concentrate and make sure the office remained secure. Jim was too important, and if revealing who she really was the only way to protect him and the others, then so be it. The way things were going, it was inevitable that he found out the truth about Hallow Grove today. She just never wanted it to happen like this. Jim and Ben followed Sally to the door, and Jim was about to reach out and stop her from opening it when she turned the knob and flung it open. A strong gust of wind ruffled their hair and clothes, and Sally walked into the storage room and approached the broken window.
"Sally, I need you to back away from the window,"
Jim said.
"We don't know what's out there, and I don't want you getting hurt."
Sally held up a hand.
"Stay back, Jim. This is something you don't yet understand."
She turned her head to look at him.
"But you will soon. I just wish I had told you sooner, but I didn't know what they were planning."
Jim held his shotgun up, ready to shoot anything that came near the window.
"I'm not sure what you're saying, Sal, but please get away from the window. We don't know what those things out there are."
"I do, Sheriff. And now I must ask you to step back."
He blinked at her commanding tone, and she gave him a reassuring smile.
"Please, Jim, trust me."
Jim wasn't a stranger to the bizarreness of Hallow Grove, and some of that carried over to the residents, especially those who had lived there their whole lives, like their ancestors before them going back 200 years. While his family had settled into their new home, he and Marie had made the effort to learn everything they could about the history of the old town so that they could speak to the locals with confidence and respect, seeing as Jim and his family were outsiders. It was important to be accepted for the sake of their children, who would be growing up there. The settlers who founded Hallow Grove came from England on huge sailing ships, bringing their entire lives with them. And once they made landfall, they moved inland for hundreds of miles until they found the perfect spot to start building a village. It had been a huge undertaking clearing the area, and according to the records, "We paid homage to the forest ancients according to the traditions and rites of our ancestors in the old land and asked their permission to live among them." This had made Jim and Marie chuckle, until they read further. Apparently, an agreement had been struck with these ancients to live on the land as long as due respect was shown and a sacrifice was given every year at summer solstice. Also, no expansion was permitted unless further agreements were reached, and the people readily agreed, for it was fertile lands and they were protected by the forest and its otherworldly inhabitants, according to the astonishing records. When Jim asked Marie what the annual sacrifice was, she blanched as she read the elegant script. A baby born during summer solstice, or as close to it as possible, was to be left in a hand-woven basket on the eastern edge of the forest at twilight, and no one from the village was allowed to watch over it. The empty basket would then be collected the next morning, and a year later a naked toddler would emerge out of the forest and return to its mother unharmed, and another newborn was to be left in exchange. This disturbing ritual had started from the very first year the people had arrived in the valley, and as far as Marie could tell, the ritual was never supposed to have stopped for fear that the ancients would take their revenge by stealing back the children and destroying the village. When Jim had asked one of the townsfolk he had made friends with about the ritual, the man gave him a fierce look and told him that such things were none of his concern as a stranger in Hallow Grove, before stomping off with a scowl. Finding his response odd and overdramatic, Jim and Marie approached the pastor after church one morning to ask him about it. He took them aside and told them with a very serious expression that they were not to openly ask about such things because it wouldn't go down well with the locals. In fact, he said it was a highly sensitive topic, and that if they wanted people to stay friendly toward them, then they'd better stop asking questions about it. Marie was very upset after that, and she urged Jim to stop their research, and he agreed for her sake and the kids. Jim eyed Sally dubiously as she waited patiently for him to do as she asked. His protective instincts were telling him to get her out of there, but it was her eyes that held him spellbound. They seemed to be glowing from some inner light, and once again all the hairs on his body stood to attention. It felt like invisible currents of power were swirling around them, and it took his breath away and made him tremble.
What in the actual hell?
Jim, I'm okay, I promise,
she said. He felt Ben tap him on the shoulder, and when he turned to look, the deputy gave him a nod. It was hard, but he stepped back and the two of them retreated to the big filing cabinets against the back wall with shotguns raised. Jim saw shadows moving in the whiteness right outside the window, and his adrenaline surged. He was ready to shoot anything that came at Sally. His skin crawled when hissing and grunting noises came out of the thick mist, and he could have sworn there were words, too. But they were foreign to him. Well, they sounded more like a very old language he'd heard somewhere. Suddenly the mists parted, and what emerged made Jim swear violently. Cold sweat instantly soaked his clothes, and he whispered,
"What the
Sally stood in the broken window, and her fury surged because it was clear to her now that the Bagadons had broken their word.
Why have you gone against the agreements?
She asked in their tongue.
What you are doing is unacceptable.
One Bagadon stepped ahead of the others and came to stand in front of the window. It sneered, then said,
"We have not broken the agreements. Shush us. It is you and your tribe that have done so."
You lie.
Sally hissed.
You come into this place and force the change and kill humans, going against the gathering's wishes and breaking your sacred agreements.
Jim noticed his shotgun shaking, and he did his best not to collapse from shock. The words coming from Sally and the nightmare creature made his body hum and his heart pound in his chest. It was almost as though he should understand them. The creature scared the living crap out of him, but again, not as much as it should have.
The agreement were never accepted by my people, simply tolerated because the tribes did not support us and listen to our valid suggestions. We grew tired of waiting for you to bring about the change peacefully.
It sneered again and hissed in contempt. And the ones behind it did the same.
You give these humans too much credit. They will never listen to you and change their ways. They are arrogant and greedy, and they have no respect for our kind. Our Gantu decided it was time to make ourselves known and begin our holy quest to claim back what was stolen. This is our way.
It raised a skinny arm into the air and shrieked. And its kind joined in. Jim whimpered and pressed hard back against the cabinets when the otherworldly sound nearly deafened him. More of the creatures had gathered behind the leader, and it was clear to him that whatever Sally was saying was making things worse. Just who was she? Not the Sally he'd always known, that's for sure. Peripherally, he saw Ben's weapon shaking and heard him breathing fast.
Your Gantu is arrogant and impatient,
Sally said with as much disdain as she could muster.
He gave us his sacred promise to wait until the Kuwatha revealed themselves to the humans and began negotiations. You know this was supposed to take place at the winter solstice. Why did you not wait?
The Bagadon laughed, an awful grating sound that made the two pale humans shake and lick their lips nervously. They were wise to be afraid.
We grow tired of your love for these pathetic beings. It is not our way to have patience. We take what we want, and what we want is our territory back.
It spread its clawed hands and shrugged in an imitation of a human. Easy to do as it used to be one for decades for the sole purpose of spying on the humans and learning their secrets and their weaknesses.
Have you forgotten that this territory belongs to us, Shashas?
Sally sighed in frustration and glared at the Bagadon. She should have known that their arrogant Gantu wouldn't keep to his agreements, but to force the change? It must have been agonizing for the changelings and the others who had been in human form for so long. The change usually took days for an adult Bagadon and months for a baby, so by blowing the great horn, the Gantu had brought great suffering and no doubt much confusion to his kind. Because the Kuwatha were elementals, their magic made shapeshifting quick and painless. She'd always known the Gantu to be brutal and arrogant and cruel, but to do this to his own people was abhorrent.
Your Gantu is a fool,
she hissed. When the Bagadon growled and bared his teeth in rage and defiance, Sally did the only thing she could. Raising her arms, she began to chant.